Hey, this is Christian Roldan,
and Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
and you're listening to
This is Nos Audietis. This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says cheated!
You wanna win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Audietis. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today to help preview the Sounders match against the Vancouver Whitecaps is Sam Rowan of the Third Sub. I get that right? I realized I didn't go over that. We didn't go over this before I started.
No, all good. Yeah, you can check us out at the Third Sub, and thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Yeah, always kind of good to get the former colleagues of the company,
Exactly.
not to be named, back together. So yeah,
Yes. So
thanks
how
for having
are
me.
we may as well start there. How are things going as an independent outlet for you guys?
You know, it's fun. I mean, it's nice in the sense that you have just, unrestricted freedoms. And I think also with the Canadian soccer scene developing here in Canada, it was nice to branch away from just, obviously we're talking Vancouver Whitecaps, we're talking MLS today, but there's Canadian Premier League, there's League One BC, League One around the country. So yeah, creating a bit of a new platform I think was fun to try to capture all of that, as well as doing what we've done for such a long time, which is the kind of core Whitecaps coverage. So yeah, thriving, and obviously super happy to see you guys doing the same down in Seattle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we may as well start there, get it out of the way. You guys I'm guessing you have two Canadian Premier League teams that you cover, or do you only cover Vancouver FC?
No, we do some. I would say it's probably more focused on Vancouver FC because writers and guys are more based here in the Lower Mainland than they are on the island. But yeah, able to do some coverage of both, and yeah, making the trip on the ferry and getting out there every once in a while is a ton of fun. My colleague and friend Alex Gagne-Ruzic, he's doing like the quadruple this weekend. So he's going to Vancouver FC Thursday and gonna hit Pacific on the island. Then he's taking the ferry from the island down and is going to be at Caps in Seattle. And then he's hitting the rain, I think, on Sunday. So
Wow.
exactly. So if he's getting 4 and 4, so yeah, I'm just going to be at the Vancouver FC match. So a light weekend for me, but good on Alex for that one.
Where's Vancouver FC playing?
So they're playing out in Langley, and I guess for those south of the border not familiar with Lower Mainland, Greater Vancouver geography, I guess it would be akin to, playing just south of Bellingham or something like that. Like, it would be 30 minutes on a good day and 55, 60 minutes on a bad day to get out there. So it's not super central. That is the one thing that I think people are divided on, is people that live out in the valley where Langley is. It feels like a local community team, but for people that live in the core of Vancouver, it's kind of like, man, it's a bit of a commute out there. So that's something they're grappling with as a team. But that was a great environment. I was there last weekend, and it's a lot of fun. So
Yeah. And while we're on the subject, Defiance signed a rather, I guess you could say, a mildly famous Canadian player, right? Wait, is it? It's Odaz? Is that how you say it? De Rosario?
Oh, it was Oz de Rosario. Yeah,
Oz.
sure. Because I guess because of the family lineage as well, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that obviously de Rosario is a strong footballing name in Canadian lore. So I think that has a bit of an impact.
But he had a pretty good, like a couple of years ago, he was considered one of the top players in the CPL, right?
He certainly, he's got a goal scoring touch and he had a strong season. But I also think that the league looks a lot different in year 6 than it did in year 2 and 3. And so I think that, that probably has something to do with it. And, it's interesting. The Canadian Premier League, I think, wants to be seen as at the same level or above certain USL and Next Pro competition, but it's not necessarily there yet. I mean, we saw someone like Mo Farsi go from a CPL side to then Columbus Crew Next Pro, and now obviously he's worked into the first team and done a tremendous job. But it still seems like Canadian Premier League often leads to USL or Next Pro before guys can just make the jump straight to MLS.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the Whitecaps a little bit. The main reason we're doing this, the Whitecaps are off to an amazing start. They, I guess on points per game, are they still leading the West, or have they fallen behind the Galaxy on points and points per game?
Well, certainly on points, they're behind the Galaxy now. I'd actually have to double check on points per game, but I think that's the starting point, right? Is that things were going really well, and last weekend was a test of the 2 best informed teams in the West, and Brian White scores to tie things up, just over around 15 minutes left to play. And at that point inside the stadium, it felt like only the home side was going to go on and win the match. There really was that feeling. And I think that almost in that moment, the Whitecaps players got a little bit confident. They started to spread out. They left those spaces, and Ricky Puig obviously can play those picture perfect balls. Joseph Panthill, can stretch with pace, and the Whitecaps got caught out on the counter twice. Next thing you know, 5-6 minutes after that tying goal, they're down 3-1. And I think that's left what has been, it's been a very good start, but that's left a bit of a sour taste in supporters' mouths here, because I think you look at some of the results and you go, okay, you smash Toronto, probably can't really take much out of that match. They almost blew a lead against Portland in a match they really should have dealt with. They drew Charlotte. They lost to RSL, again, allowing late goals, kind of like the LA Galaxy match. So, and they picked up 2 gritty road wins, but they're against FC Dallas and San Jose, who, as we've seen, are not particularly strong teams in the West. I mean, FC Dallas, I think people thought would be a lot better. And even San Jose, you could have made a case at the start of the year for like maybe a fringe playoff team, but they've obviously struggled. So, there is a very, everyone's happy that the Whitecaps are off to a strong start, because usually they get off to slow starts. I do think there's like a measured, cautious approach to how they performed so far based on those background factors.
Sure. And, does it feel like this is a breakthrough season for the Whitecaps in the offing, or is there still a lot of nervousness, would you say?
Well, okay, so we could talk about kind of like organizationally where they're at. And I think in that sense, we've been talking about it on the site since like probably early last year, that these are the push the chips into the middle of the table years, because you have Reingold and Brian White in those late 20s, even like Alessandro Schopf, they brought in Sam Adekubi. These are all prime age players. This is not a bunch of 21 and 22 year olds. Sure, there's Ali Ahmed, there's Pedro Vite. You're always going to have those younger guys, but the core of the squad is between 25 and 32. So these are the years to go for it. And so I think there's a lot of positivity around the team, but there's a little bit of that angst as well, that it's like, man, these are the years to contend. So the standard and the bar is set high. It's not just about oh, we make the playoffs and, oh, gee, hopefully we can win a playoff round. I think the ambitions both within the club and from supporters have grown to be a little bit higher than that. And so I think that's where, when I'm talking about the first 7 games and they're second in the West, and yet there's still a lot of questions, I think it's just because they're holding themselves and supporters are holding them to that high standard. And that's just kind of based on the phase of the cycle that the organization is in at the moment.
Sure. And I guess another positive sign, though, and this doesn't necessarily apply this week, but the attendance at Whitecaps games is much better than it has. I mean, this is I would think trending toward a not only a record attendance year, but by a significant margin. If I'm looking at these numbers correctly.
Yeah, it's been a dramatic spike. I mean, we were talking things were trending towards this kind of look pre-COVID. And then obviously when that happened, it derailed everything, especially because of how stringent things were in Canada and the fact the Whitecaps were away for way longer than most teams.
Right. Yeah.
It just tanked the interest in the club. And I also think that the ticket prices were quite high prior to COVID and kind of back in that era. Now I think the combination of both lowered ticket prices and just like more available for resale, so you can get into the building a lot easier on match day if you want. And then also, there is the undoubtable Messi effect, and he's going to be in Vancouver on May 25th. So I think a lot of people have purchased either like 4 or 5 game packs or half season ticket, full season tickets, just in anticipation of attending that match. And then also the fact that, last season was probably the best, most interesting, at least, season for the Whitecaps in recent memory. They ended up finishing 6th in the West and they get bounced by LAFC. But I feel like for a good portion of last year, they were flirting with those, kind of top 4 spots. And I think that created some interest and excitement, and they scored a ton of goals. They couldn't defend last season, but they filled the net.
Right. And I was going to say that the thing that seems to be, at least from the Whitecaps have never been a team that I get the sense that neutrals are interested in. But right now, it feels like they are one of those teams that people want to watch, that, it's that people are paying attention because they're fun. They're, it's not just that they're scoring goals. It's that they've got interesting players and they've got a very interesting coach as well. Vanni Sartini it seems like every other week he's dropping some kind of quote that is, interesting at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, I think both in terms of personality and in terms of tactics, Vanni has brought that, right? Because he's both as a person and as a manager, I think very like unrelenting and uncompromising in his principles. So that goes for off the pitch, and we saw the chaos last year in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But then also in terms of his tactics, like he is absolutely resolute about this is a zonal marking team, and they're not going to stray away from that. They're not going to let any doubt creep in. He plays it's a 3-4-3 system defensively, and it is a true back 3. Like it's not a tuck an extra wide player in at the back. It's not a fall back into a 5. It is a true back 3, and those wide center backs are asked to do a lot. And yeah, I think it's just, his tactics, his personality is obviously, I think, added to that interest significantly. And it's a big part of the reason why they were able to score so many goals last season. Now, I would say for those down in Seattle that, maybe only caught a match or a glimpse of what the Whitecaps have been up to this season, I would say that they have taken that like guns blazing, outscore your opponent's approach. They've taken that a few steps back this year, because I think they looked at themselves and realized this is fun, but this is not a sustainable way to go deep in the playoffs or to win games consistently, because last season was characterized by throwing away points from scenarios where they really should have created more. And so they've tried at least to be a little bit more tactical and clinical, and knowing when to sit in a mid block, knowing when to shut the game down. And, I talked about them blowing a couple leads, but I think on the whole, this has been an improved defensive unit this season. That's been one of the early storylines. Just in terms of like performance, even if there have been a couple late game letdowns, it's last season it was like every time there was a cross or a set piece, you felt like they were going to concede. And that's not been the case this season. It's been a much more confident unit. It's actually been on the offensive side of the ball where White and Gauld have taken a little bit of time to get going. Damir Kreilach hasn't worked fantastically when he's been integrated up front. So that's actually the area where it's been a bit more of a mixed bag. But Vancouver still has that element where they can score in bunches when the timing's right and when they kind of get out in transition. They can still be very fun to watch, but they're not doing that from minute 1 to minute 90 anymore. It's a little more measured.
So two of the players, obviously, that are driving this team, that are getting the most interest, that are, the players around that are most often credited with the success they've had, are Ryan Gauld and Brian White, sort of a dynamic duo of sorts. I guess they're not necessarily off to blazing starts this year, but Brian White, last week was I don't know, was it a fair example? It seemed like he had probably 4 good looks. He scored 1, but it's one of those things where on one hand, you want him getting into these positions as much as possible, but on the other, I'm guessing you'd like him to finish a few more of them.
Well, yeah, certainly last weekend, that was the complaint. And I think Brian was the first to admit it post-match that he certainly had the opportunity to change the feeling and the way that match went if he had found a goal in the first half. I mean, he had a great opportunity at his feet, and then he had basically a free header, right at the top of the 6 and couldn't find the frame. And so, those moments again, when the Whitecaps are playing a little more pragmatically and they're not just like volume shooting, well, then there's an increased emphasis on finishing those chances when you get them. And the Whitecaps, I think, going into the LA Galaxy match, they were first in the league in terms of conversion rate. So they had been doing that up until that point in the season. They're actually, last season was very much like, we're going to have 8 great chances, but we're only going to score 1 goal. That was the frustration. This year, they haven't, the creation has been lower event, but higher quality when they've created those chances. And this was the first match where they kind of looked a bit like the 2023 version, where they played really well on the ball at times, but yeah, couldn't find a way to finish. So, Brian White's one of those guys that I think it does take a little bit of time for him to find his shooting boots. And once he starts to find the net on a regular basis, things sort of pick up. So this is a frustration with White from time to time, but he manages to put out a great goal scoring rate over the course of the season. So I think it's one of those things you just, you might get frustrated with in the moment, but you're going to look back on the season and be pretty satisfied with its performance, I think.
So a player who I imagine most people don't think of immediately as key to the Whitecaps' success. I'm sitting here looking at their scoring leaders. Fafa Picault tied with Brian White in both goals and assists. He's on 5 goals plus 3 goals, 2 assists. What's he been? How important has he been? And what's his situation like right now?
Yeah, so unfortunately for Fafa, he had to come off against the LA Galaxy with some back spasms, and he's not back to training this week. So I would not expect him to play this weekend, and I think he will be ruled out. And so what that means for Vancouver and what it's meant for Vancouver this season is they brought in really 2 veteran additions to mix in the front 3. Fafa Picault and Damir Kreilach, as I mentioned. The problem when Damir Kreilach plays is that with Gauld sitting underneath whoever of those 2 forwards, Kreilach and White between them don't have any pace. And so they don't stretch back lines. They're not a threat to run in behind. Center backs can really just play them straight up, deny them hold up play, and that's kind of it. And so what Fafa has been able to do when he comes in is the exact opposite of that, which is be a real danger. And also something that I think that's been really impressive about Picault so far is that, he's not just a threat to run at you 1v1 or run behind. He's chipped in with assists. Like they've been high quality assists, really good balls into the box. His goals have been like really tidy finishes and not necessarily easy ones either. Not all back post tap-ins. And so, he's showed kind of a complete forward toolbox, which is really valuable to Vancouver just to give White and Gall that little bit more space, because at the end of last year, and I think LAFC was perhaps better than anyone at keying in on this, they only played with two up front. So it was really just White and Gall on their own. And what other teams would do is they would just take their two center backs, they would bracket Brian White, deny him hold up, just harass him physically, and then you didn't get that Gall and White magic the way you were early in the season. So Vanny decided we're going to go with three forwards to try to counteract what teams were doing. But with Krylak, they just ran into the exact same problem. So Fafa's been able to come in and provide that solution. I mean, the Whitecaps had Sergio Cordova for part of last season. I think he was supposed to play that Fafa Pico role to maybe stretch teams, give them a different attacking weapon to worry about. That didn't work out, but now they went the veteran route, and yeah, he's been working so far, and he'll certainly be missed this weekend. So I think that's something where it'll be interesting to see what the Whitecaps lineup is. Do they go back to Krylak? Do they mix a younger player in there, or do they just change the formation to make do with who they have up front?
So one of the things you said earlier, I wanted to come back to because it's kind of an interesting idea to me. You said that that Vancouver really plays three in the back. Like it's not a 5/3. It's really a three with. So what are they really playing without wingbacks, and what is the role of those sort of wide midfielders?
So I think the joke, the a couple of jokes I guess in Vancouver is that, first of all, like Vanni Sartini has no time for out and out wingers, like your traditional, bunch of step overs and take on a guy 1v1. Like that's 4-3-3 wingers. That's not his jam.
Okay.
And then also he turns almost without fail, like every midfield or guy that maybe was a number 10 and is transitioning into a number 8 or whatever, everyone gets tried out at wing back at one point. Okay. So you have Alessandro Schopf, who was like a Bundesliga midfielder, used to play as a number 10. He's been playing at wing back, like in air quotes wing back, but really it's a midfield role, right? And he's tucking inside, or okay, he comes back and he supports wide defensively, maybe picks up the ball in wide areas, but he's not doing like your Alphonso Davies wingback type things. It's a very different role. I mean, same thing when healthy Sam Adekubi on the other side. It's more of like a fullback / midfielder. The Whitecaps in general are just very, very narrow in terms of their buildup. So, and Vanny just seems to favor those players. So, yeah, there's a lot asked of. I mean, it's been mostly Matthias Laborda and Tristan Blackman this season in those wide center back roles. I feel like that's easily the most demanding position on the pitch in this Vancouver Whitecaps formation, because you're asked to, whether it's Denny Bouanga or Pantsil or Peck last weekend, you're asked to defend those guys 1v1 on regular occasion as a center back. And handle that, and then also be good on the ball in terms of distribution and starting, phases of possession. So it's incredibly demanding. And yeah, I would describe those wide players in the 4 for Vancouver as more, they're really more midfielders that try to tuck inside, and sometimes it can look like a diamond in the midfield. Sometimes it gets flat. Sometimes you have either Gall or Pico dropping deep. It's really quite fluid in that sense. But no matter what, those three are kind of on their own at the back with some support to try to kind of, protect. Their job is to protect the box and hold things down centrally, and they've done a pretty good job so far this season.
So, broadly speaking, how would you say, what's the outlook for the Whitecaps coming into this game? Are they confident? I know Seattle is not necessarily someplace they've had a lot of recent success.
What was it, like 2016 was the last time the Whitecaps had
been
a win?
A while.
Yeah, it's been almost so long it's not worth counting at this point. I think there's I guess there's two schools of thought going on, right? There's like, man, if there's a time to try to get Seattle, it's now. That would be the one thought. And then the other thought is, man, we haven't gone in there and secured a victory in a really long time. And the Whitecaps probably don't love that. I mean, this is the best form that Seattle's been in all season so far, right? At least you're undefeated in your last two.
Yeah.
Okay,
Low bar, but yes.
With low bar, but nonetheless, things at least are on a slight upward trend. So, I think the goal still is to go in and get points of some variety. It's not necessarily an expectation that we're going to go in there and take all three, but I think really in any match this season, the Whitecaps do rate themselves to compete right near the top of the table. They certainly have that self-belief. So I think there's no reason that they can't go in and get a result. Obviously missing Pico is a bit of a downer. But I think especially, if you're trying to play a tight, 0-0, 1-1 type match, maybe that's not the end of the world. And I think from like a pure matchup perspective, the fact that Seattle's been able to, and I mean, you can correct me if you think slightly differently, because I've only seen some of Seattle this season, but my sense is that they're able to create a lot of good possession around the box, but actually getting like those crucial chances and then finishing them has been a problem. And this seems like something that spans back to last year as well, right?
Oh,
To me, that's music to the Whitecaps' ears, because they've done a pretty good job of, okay, you can have some possession around the box, but we're not going to allow those deadly chances. And because Seattle doesn't seem like a team that's going to like really punish you on the counter in those transition moments, I feel like stylistically that's a good matchup for Vancouver. But we also saw Leo Chu. He does have that ability to terrorize and had some brilliant moments against Vancouver in recent years. So I think that's a player they'll really focus their efforts on trying to shut down if he plays.
Yeah. No, I would say that's an accurate read on the Sounders. So finally, this is the 50th, or at least the Sounders and Whitecaps are both celebrating their 50th anniversaries this year. They obviously have a lot of shared history that goes across multiple leagues, and obviously shared in the Cascadia Cup and everything else. But how is the 50th anniversary being treated in Vancouver?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a good opportunity for, certainly newer fans to embrace and understand the history of the club, because realistically, how many people that were part of the club or involved with the club or supported the club 50 years ago are still going to matches now? The list is small. And even, back to 25, 30 years ago, it was, more of a niche thing than it is now. So I think for those newer fans, those who have joined since MLS, it's a good opportunity to maybe learn a bit about the club's history. Hey, I never knew that. That's cool. And then for those that have been around for a long time, it's an opportunity to kind of reminisce and celebrate some of that. And I mean, I think the Whitecaps have always been pretty decent at like promoting the history and the culture of the club. And it is really, soccer in Vancouver is like a small part of the sports culture, but I think those that have been invested in it for a long time are really passionate about it and feel very strongly about it. So I think it's a really good moment for those people. And then again, just for like the wider supporters group or someone who shows up to a random match, it's just like a reminder that this isn't a brand new expansion side. This is a club with long history, even if it's not all MLS history.
Yeah. I think they still celebrate the 86ers era. They still obviously the Whitecaps were in the USL. It's a very, I think it's worth remembering that these two teams have a lot of shared history and came into existence essentially together. But Sam, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Good catching up with you. Where can people read you and let us know what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in any Whitecaps content, the thirdsub.ca would be the first place to go. You can always just search us up on social, be it Twitter/X or Instagram or anything like that. We're not too difficult to find. And yeah, pre-post match coverage. If you want to tuck into some Canadian Premier League or other Canadian soccer content, we have that as well. So Jeremiah, appreciate you having me on, and looking forward to the match this weekend.
Absolutely. All right. With that, I'll bid you adieu. I'm Jeremiah Sheehan. This is Nos Adietas, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.